I've been tracking this war since February 28th, and I want to be honest with you about something. The situation right now, this weekend, is the most dangerous it has been since the first bombs fell. And the reason it got here is a direct result of decisions Trump made and didn't make over the past 3 weeks. Let me walk you through exactly what happened and what it means for you starting tomorrow morning when markets open. First, understand where things stood before this weekend. Iran had been running what I'd call a selective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Not a full closure, a selective one. They told the world the strait is open to everyone except America's allies. China's ships were passing through. India negotiated safe passage for 2 of its gas tankers last Saturday. Iran's foreign minister told Japan directly that Japanese vessels could coordinate with Tehran for safe transit. Even a Greek bulk carrier got through by sailing close to Iran's coastline and broadcasting the message, "Cargo food for Iran." What Iran built is not a wall. It's a checkpoint. And they are the ones deciding who gets through. Think about what that actually means in practice. Iran has effectively become the gatekeeper of 20% of the world's oil supply. They are letting China through. They are letting India through. They are letting neutral countries through. And they are blocking the US, Israel, and anyone they consider an ally of either. This is not a military stalemate. This is Iran running customs on the world's most important waterway, while America's 2 carrier strike groups watch from outside. And the longer this checkpoint operates, the more every government on Earth is watching and drawing conclusions about who actually controls that strait right now. The answer to that question is not Washington. There is a deeper consequence to this selective blockade that I want you to think about carefully because it goes beyond oil prices. What Iran has done is create a 2-tier global trade system at the most critical choke point in the world. Countries that align with America pay the price. Countries that stay neutral or lean toward Beijing pass through freely. Every government in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East is watching that dynamic and quietly calculating whether alignment with Washington is worth the cost. Saudi Arabia is watching, the UAE is watching, Indonesia is watching, Vietnam is watching. Iran didn't just block a waterway, it created a live demonstration that America cannot guarantee the safety of trade for its own partners in the most critical shipping lane on the planet. That demonstration has been running for 3 weeks with no solution in sight. Now, here's what makes it worse. I've spent the last week going through every statement Trump made about this war, and the pattern is alarming. On Friday, he posted that America was getting very close to meeting its objectives and suggested the U.S. was considering winding down military efforts. That was Friday. Then on Saturday night, less than 24 hours later, he posted a 48-hour ultimatum on Truth Social. The exact words were, if Iran doesn't fully open, without threat, the Strait of Hormuz, within 48 hours from this exact point in time, the United States will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. So Friday, he's winding down. Saturday night, he's threatening to obliterate power plants. That is not a strategy. Former U.S. Ambassador John Bass, who served in both Afghanistan and Turkey, said it directly. He said the administration failed to think through the contingencies around ways the conflict could go sideways. And Republican strategist Dave Wilson, someone who works with Trump's own base, said people are already starting to ask why they are paying high gas prices and why the Strait of Hormuz is determining whether they can take a vacation next month. That is Trump's own political base starting to question this. I want to stay on that point for a moment because it matters more than most coverage is acknowledging. Trump built his entire political brand around economic competence. Cheap energy, low prices, deals that benefit the American worker. His exact words on energy policy, repeated across dozens of rallies, were drill baby drill. The implicit promise was that under his leadership, Americans would pay less at the pump, not more. Right now, 3 weeks into a war he launched, the average American household is paying roughly $150 more per month on combined fuel, food, and energy costs than they were on February 27th. The political base that gave him a second term is the same demographic most exposed to energy price increases, most likely to drive long distances to work, most likely to heat their homes with oil or natural gas. Every week this war continues without a resolution is a week that promise gets further from reality. Dave Wilson is not a liberal critic. He works with Trump's coalition. When that voice starts saying what he said this weekend, that is a signal worth paying attention to. Now let me tell you what Iran said in response to that ultimatum, because this is what's heading into your Monday morning. Iran's military command said if Trump hits their power plants, they will strike all U.S. energy infrastructure, all information technology infrastructure, and all water desalination facilities in the region. And then Iran's Revolutionary Guard went further. They said the Strait of Hormuz will be completely closed and will not be reopened until any destroyed power plants are rebuilt. Not until a ceasefire. Not until negotiations. Until the power plants are physically rebuilt. Rebuilding a major power plant takes years. The Al-Shahid Montazeri power plant, Iran's largest and the one Trump specifically referenced, has a capacity of 2,500 megawatts and took over a decade to construct. If Trump destroys it, Iran's stated condition for reopening the strait is that it gets rebuilt before they stand down. That is not a negotiating position. That is a guarantee of a multi-year closure. Iran's parliament speaker wrote publicly that critical infrastructure and energy facilities across the entire Middle East could be irreversibly destroyed. He specifically used the word irreversibly. That word choice is deliberate. He is not threatening a temporary disruption. He is threatening permanent damage to the energy and water infrastructure that the entire Gulf region depends on. Now I need you to understand what desalination means in this context, because most people outside the region don't. Bahrain produces 100% of its drinking water from desalination plants. Qatar produces 100%. The UAE uses desalination for more than 80% of its drinking water. Saudi Arabia relies on it for 50% of national water supply. Kuwait is almost entirely dependent on it. These are not backup systems. They are the entire water supply for tens of millions of people living in desert cities that would be uninhabitable within days without them. The Ras Al Khair desalination plant in Saudi Arabia alone supplies drinking water to Riyadh, a city of 7 million people. Iran is not threatening to turn off the lights. Iran is threatening to turn off the water for the entire Arabian Peninsula. And here is what that means beyond the humanitarian catastrophe. Every American military base in the Gulf region depends on the same desalination infrastructure for its own water supply. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which is the largest U.S. air base in the Middle East and the central hub for the air campaign against Iran, sources its water from Qatar's national desalination system, the same system Iran just threatened to destroy. If those facilities are hit, the U.S. military's operational capacity in the region degrades within days, not weeks. This is not a threat against civilians only. This is a threat against the logistical foundation of the American military campaign itself. Now, here is the part of this story I want you to connect directly to your own situation, because this is where the geopolitics stops being abstract and starts being your bank statement. Goldman Sachs said on Friday that elevated oil prices could persist through 2027, not through the end of this conflict, through 2027. Brent crude climbed to $114 a barrel on Sunday after Iran's latest threats. U.S. crude crossed $100. Oil is up 75% since the start of this year. The Federal Reserve was expected to cut interest rates twice in 2026 before this war started. Those cuts are now off the table. Every analyst I follow, from Deutsche Bank to JP Morgan to the IMF, is saying the same thing. The Fed cannot cut rates in an inflationary environment being driven by an oil shock, and the oil shock is not going away, while 20% of the world's oil supply is being gatekept by a country that just refused a presidential ultimatum on social media. What does that mean for you specifically? It means your mortgage rate stays where it is. If you are renting and hoping rates fall enough to buy, that timeline just extended. If you have a variable rate loan of any kind, the pressure on that rate is upward, not downward. If you have money in a target date retirement fund or a broad market index, the sectors inside that fund most exposed to energy cost increases, consumer discretionary, transportation, manufacturing, have been bleeding since February 28th, while defense and oil companies collect the gains. The S&P 500 number you see on your brokerage screen is a weighted average. Inside that average, money is moving from your sectors to theirs. The war has already cost the U.S. military many billions of dollars, and the Pentagon has requested $200 billion more from Congress just to sustain operations through the end of the fiscal year. To put that number in context, the entire annual budget of the Department of Education is $79 billion. The additional war funding being requested is more than twice that, and it covers less than 1 year of operations at current burn rates. That money comes from somewhere. It comes from the national debt, which means it comes from future tax obligations that will eventually land on the people who are already paying more for gas and groceries right now. Aaron David Miller, who spent decades as a Middle East negotiator for both Republican and Democratic administrations, put it plainly this weekend. He said Trump has built himself a box called the Iran War and cannot figure out how to get out of it. I've read his work for years, and I cannot remember him being this direct about a sitting president's strategic position. When someone with his resume says that publicly, it means the people inside the process are saying things privately that are significantly worse. There are only 3 paths from here as I see it. Trump hits the power plants, Iran closes the strait completely and starts targeting desalination facilities across the Gulf, oil goes to $150 or beyond, and the global financial system starts facing the kind of derivatives cascade I covered in a previous video, where knockout clauses in energy contracts begin triggering automatically, and the banks that wrote those contracts discover they cannot cover the exposure, or Trump backs down from the ultimatum, which means Iran has publicly called his bluff on Truth Social, and every government watching this conflict, friend and adversary alike, draws the obvious conclusion about American credibility going forward. Every future ultimatum gets measured against this one. Every future red line gets tested against what happened here. Or both sides quietly find an off-ramp before the clock runs out, which some people inside the White House are reportedly pushing for, but which Iran's public statements this weekend have made extremely difficult for Tehran to accept, without appearing to capitulate to a social media threat. None of those 3 outcomes is clean. None of them produces cheap gas by summer. None of them restores the alliance relationships that have been strained over the past 3 weeks. And none of them addresses the fundamental reality that Iran has spent this entire conflict demonstrating to the watching world that it can absorb American military pressure, maintain a functional choke point on global energy supply, and negotiate safe passage selectively with countries it prefers, while America's allies pay the price. Jim Crane, energy fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute, said this weekend that it would take a lot of spin to still call any of this a victory. He said the U.S. is supposed to be the Gulf's security provider, not the instigator of regional warfare that stops the oil flow. The countries that have based their entire national security calculation on American protection are now watching Iranian drones target their ports, Iranian threats target their water supply, and American strategy shift by 180 degrees between Friday and Saturday night. The security umbrella that justified hosting American bases, integrating with American military systems, and aligning with American foreign policy is looking considerably less reliable than it did on February 27th. What I've watched over the past 3 weeks is a war that was sold as a short excursion, with clear objectives turned into a situation where the U.S. is isolated from its allies. Iran is selectively managing who gets through the world's most important strait. The president is posting 48-hour ultimatums on Truth Social on Saturday nights, while his own advisors are privately pushing for an off-ramp. The Gulf states that host American bases are watching their water infrastructure get threatened, and the American household is paying more for everything, while the Federal Reserve cannot offer any relief because the inflation driving those prices comes from a conflict with no visible endpoint. The 48-hour clock expires Monday evening. Markets reopen Monday morning. Oil is at $114. Goldman Sachs says it stays elevated through 2027. Iran has publicly refused the ultimatum and countered with threats against water and power infrastructure across the entire Arabian Peninsula. Trump's own base is starting to ask questions his team doesn't have clean answers for. I'd suggest you pay close attention to both the markets and the news feeds on Monday, because the next move in this sequence, whichever of the 3 paths it follows, is going to reprice a lot of things that directly affect your budget for the rest of this year. If this breakdown gave you something the evening news didn't, subscribe. We cover this every week because what happens at the Strait of Hormuz doesn't stay at the Strait of Hormuz. It ends up at your gas station, your grocery store, your heating bill, and your mortgage rate. And right now, nobody in Washington seems to have a clear plan for how this ends.